My name is Temistogli. I'm representing the essentially what would be a explorer or raider around year 900 to about 1,000. I'm a practitioner of the Norse religion, so I decided to do a Norse raider kit. As you can see here, basically, so I do real steel fights. So I decided to essentially make my kit as historically accurate as possible. This is not my real steel helmet, as it does not protect my face. However, this is a solid representation of what a helmet would look like among the time of the Norse raiding or exploring, as raiding was only a part of why travel would happen. During that time, armor, weapons, and tactics exploded, as you have things like swords coming out that would not very well be common. However, if you saw someone with a sword in full armor, you knew that they had either money or skill or both. You had things like the axe, where a lot of people would raid with the axe, not because it was utilitarian, but because they were farmers. And if you're farming, you're chopping wood, and you know how to use an axe, you already have an axe. Now, this specific axe is called a skegox, a bearded axe, where this one specifically is made for combat, where you can use the beard to hook people's shields, you can use it to hook people's armor. There are even some accounts where some warriors would dual wield them, or even single use, and catch people's blades in them, and then thrust with their own weapon. You had things like this, which is a sex. The 30-inch sex, which is what I have in my hands right here, is a chopping weapon. Easier construction than a sword, cheaper than a sword, but can deal more, if not the same amount of devastating power that a sword can. An ill-trained practitioner can use a sex and chop, but if you don't know what you're doing with a sword, you'll end up hurting yourself more than the enemy. Many warriors would carry around this smaller sex like this, like so. It's just a smaller version of this. Smaller knives, much chainmail. Padded shirts were coming around at that time. However, for the most part, it was just wool, like this jacket here, what I'm wearing here, or even just a linen shirt for the hotter months. For the colder months, however, they did have things such as reindeer hide. This is reindeer hide that I procured. That is extremely warm, too warm in fact for today. However, you had armor coming out such as splint. Splint began making its comeback as the raids were happening. Whether the raids and the splint went hand in hand is really up to whichever historical account that you take, as splint armor was still common within the Middle East.
Where was that worn? On the arm, the leg?
This was worn, so this particular size would be worn on your forearm, like so. A lot of people in a lot of movies and stuff would have, a lot of people believe that bracers were not worn. Bracers were indeed worn, as we've seen in many depictions, many paintings, especially if you don't use a shield, as if you block with your bare forearm, you're going to get seriously injured. However, at one point, these splint did indeed move down to the shins, and people began armoring up more. Something they would always wear, however, at least underneath their shin guards, as some didn't, wear leggings. Now, leggings, or as these ones I have here is how they would be worn, were warm, they were waterproof, water resistant, they gave support to the leg and the ankle. They were decently easy enough to make, as you'd really just need tight enough wool. You had padded caps that began making their rounds for underneath the helmet. Some would just wear hoods like this. Some would just wear the helmet itself, as if you look inside, there is a suspension system that you can be used without any padding. Then you had for the more colder months, and you had this style of fur hat come along, as it would just be wool with fur. These style hats, from what I've been able to find, were more common among the Kievan Rus, which is now modern-day Russia. The Kievan Rus, from what I've been able to find, relied more on heavy cavalry and heavy infantry, which would be chainmail, with a version of splint, like so, but on their chest, called lamellar. Cloaks were a very common part of an explorer's kit in general, as this cloak here if undone, could easily serve as a tent. As tents were not very common among that particular brand of exploration, as you wanted to travel light. You would have perhaps a leather bag, more first something to sleep on, such as their pants, however. So like these are wool. These would be better for the winter. They sit on you wide, they're very breathable, very comfortable, but they're also warm. They're a lot warmer than you would think, even though they sit very wide. The ones I'm wearing are burlap or linen. These are meant for the hotter months, and they sit on me very, very loose, very nice. However, these are ones that you can wear without leg wraps because they don't tighten at your shin. They actually stay open. Obviously, are extremely important throughout history. Can't do much without shoes. So there were different designs of shoes that would come about. These boots became not so much popular as they were just another form of footwear to wear. Me personally, I like turnbuckle shoes as they're easier to put on and easier to wear with the null-bond socks. Null-bond socks are these thick socks that you would wear that they were semi-waterproof, however they were wool, which means when they got wet, they stayed warm. But essentially this would be, minus the lack of food, this would essentially be the kit of a typical explorer among what could be considered the golden age of Vikings. As they traveled around, gained different things. Vikings were, for lack of a better word, they were very gaudy with their armor. It was very status oriented. My sash is from China. It's made of silk. So this would mark me, I've been to China. I found this, I have the money, I have the experience. This right here is from the Middle East, where the Norse actually had a decent amount of influence over in different forms of just trade, exploration, and then within the old Roman empires as the Varangian Guard, where they can be considered one of the first major special operations groups, as they would serve almost like shock troops and Kingsguard. But aside from that, with the end of the Viking period, their golden age, with the death of King Harald Hardrada, the raids largely stopped as no other leader really arose to lead massive armies across the world anymore. And as their soldiers kind of, in a way, faded in history, so did their influence, as it took a back seat to more, I guess you could say, more powerful kingdoms.